Milling Through History presents The Bell Witch. When it comes to frontier history, a lot of terms can be used to describe the frontier. But in the early 19th century, the frontier of America was actually everything between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. And in the state of Tennessee, there is a rather unique story which comes from that particular area of the American frontier, which has had a long-term reverberating effect in the psyche of the nation. And that is the story of the Bell Witch. Now, this particular story is a rather unique one, as the legend itself seems to begin in the year 1817. Now, in that particular year, a number of people claim to have seen rather strange things, namely the form of a ghostly type witch. Those individuals, it began with a man by the name of John Bell, who saw an apparition of a strange dog. Another member of his family, Drew Bell, saw a strange bird of an extraordinary size. Betsy Bell observed a girl in a green dress swinging from an oak. Now, Dean, an enslaved individual owned by the Bell family, began reporting that he was being followed by a large black dog. And the household was said to have dealt with knocking on the doors and walls, along with gnawing on the beds, invisible dog fights, and chains on the floor. Physical violence soon began to spread to the children, but specifically being targeted to Betsy. And finally, John Bell suffered paralysis of the mouth. Now, a family friend, a man by the name of James Johnston, witnessed the events and said it was a spirit. And the spirit would eventually begin to communicate with the family, claiming it had been disturbed, and thus bringing it out into the world. Now, the spirit proceeded to recite sermons being given from miles away, and even discuss gossip from the area. The witch even went so far as to declare her intention to kill John Bell, which she successfully did through poisoning. Now, the witch would even go on to interrupt his funeral with drinking songs. In 1821, Betsy Bell called off her engagement, and upon doing so, the witch said she was going to leave, but return in 7 years' time. In 1828, the witch did return. However, the family did not encourage the witch's activities, and eventually the spirit left once again. And so, all these particular tales, which occurred over about an 11-year period, is a rather unique one, namely because the stories and the legends of this witch seemingly took on a life of its own. But even when it comes to these strange witches, one does have to wonder, just how much truth is there to a story like this? Well, the written records are usually the best place to go. And the earliest known written records of the witch came from John Bell himself in 1820, while he was on an expedition into the Rocky Mountains. Now, subsequent articles were published throughout the 1800s of a witch which seemingly resembled the Bell Witch, but were not from different areas. Some historians believe the different locations over time eventually combined itself together and created the overall legend. In 1890, a definitive history of the Bell Witch was written, and according to the author, the book was not allowed to be published until after all the primary family members who were involved with the events of the Bell Witch had passed away. Now, as a result of it, the admission of the reasoning behind the publication brought a great deal of speculation about the book into question, as this means all the information collected might not necessarily be legitimate. And thus we come to another part of the Bell Witch story. How legitimate is this story when it comes to history? Well, therein lies a lot of the problem. Historians doubt the actual legitimacy of the existence to the Bell Witch. In fact, most argue that this particular moment in history may have been due to a legend that was mistaken for fact, and the lines between truth and fiction became greatly blurred. Now, in addition to this, other historians point out that many of the events which occurred in the story could have been a result of a child. In fact, a number of psychologists have even argued that all these stories of the Bell Witch, namely all the stories of gossip, physical violence, all seem to indicate that it may have been a child retelling the story. And historians think in this case, if that were true, it's Betsy Bell who was behind the majority of the mischief when discussing all the events around the Bell Witch. Now, whether or not the story is true, though, it has done something else, namely providing historians with a prime opportunity to study social customs and beliefs for the then frontier of American society in the early 19th century. And so, while the Bell Witch might not necessarily be a true story in the ultimate sense of a historical event, it does provide us with rather unique ideas of what it was people believed in for the 19th century. For more information, please consider these suggested titles. Be sure to click on the left-hand side of the screen to subscribe to our show, and on the right-hand side for our latest episode. And we will see you again for the next episode of Milling Through History.